And we're live. We are live. Hey, everybody. You're listening to Restore the Republic, the voice of the people who's had enough. Enough of the corrupt judges, enough of the rogue cops, enough of the lawyers who twist the law and the politicians who trample it. The show dares to ask, what happened to our de jure American government and how do we get it back? I'm your host, Sheriff Andrew Ike on the unincorporated county, Richland County, Ohio. And every week we expose the lies and decode the legal traps and empower you to reclaim what's rightfully yours. No fluff, no compromise, just fact. With me, as always, Sheriff Adam Bonner on the unincorporated Summit County, Ohio. How's it going, Adam?
Pretty good. How you guys doing over there?
Doing great. Hey, we survived Halloween. I hope everybody had a good time with the kiddies. But we also have an anniversary today. You know, it's I think 1 full month of governmental service shutdown. You know, our subcontractors are not doing their job. What do you think about that?
Have they ever? At least, not within an actual office with all the proper, bonds and appointments. We talk about this across various platforms. I mean, it's, to my knowledge and research, that they're still in vacated positions and the usurpation continues.
Hey, hang on.
A lot of confusion.
Hey, Adam, we're not live. Hang on.
Yeah.
Now we're live. Holy moly. Okay, so anyways, we're live now. This is Restore the Republic, the voice of the people who's had enough of the corrupt judges, enough of the rogue cops, enough of the lawyers who twist and trample the law, and the politicians right along with them. This is a show that dares to ask what happened to the de jure American government and how can we get it back. I'm your host, Sheriff Andrew Ike on the unincorporated Richland County, Ohio. And every week we expose the lies and decode the legal traps and empower you to reclaim what's rightfully yours. No fluff, no compromise, just facts. And with me, as always, Sheriff Adam Bonner, unincorporated Summit County, Ohio. How's it going, Adam?
Pretty good. Let's take two.
Yeah.
To get back to what you were saying is, no, I don't believe that they are, that they've ever done their job. They're still, part of the usurpation. They're still operating in vacated positions. They still are missing recognizance bonds and all of the proper appointments and paperwork that needs to be filed in certain places in the state. I have yet to find the majority of all of the states, hire elected officials with the proper paperwork, all the way down to the city levels. So other than that, we see Samantha, Richard Lawland. Today we got a pretty good.
For all of you that don't know, we picked up at a weird time, but we're just celebrating the 1 month anniversary of our governmental service provider shutdown.
Right.
It's almost like we don't even need them at all,
Yep.
Or at least maybe we need to get some contracts out to some other people,
Yeah, let me turn my volume up real quick. I've been kind of toggling around with my sound card.
You sound pretty good on this end.
Yeah, normally I keep it around 75% for these, but when I'm on other platforms, I turn it down because there's other things going on in the background I need to hear.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I was going to say, all right, people, we're going to have a little discussion today about the national jurisdiction. It's kind of, it goes along with the soil. It's sort of the soil is the national jurisdiction. It's where the living people are. It's where we have our authority in our counties on the soil jurisdiction, but it's known as the national jurisdiction too, the national soil jurisdiction. And we're going to go over some things, and I know for a lot of you it might get confusing, so just try to listen up. And if you have any questions, go ahead and ask. And you also have to do your research. When you pick out keywords or phrases or don't know something, you need to get in the books. You need to get learning. So anyways, national jurisdiction, we're going to identify 3 unions. They're various kinds of states. And they existed long prior to the creation of the federal government. They were here before the federal government, before Washington, D.C. And they were and are, Adam?
Well, the United States, a union of soil jurisdiction, landed states formed by the former colonies via the unanimous declaration issued, July 1st, 1776, and published July 4th, 1776. So this is our national jurisdiction. The lowercase state is defined geographical boundaries for. So, two, the United States of America, a federation of land jurisdiction states formed September 9th, 1776, for the purposes of joint operations in international jurisdiction, including the international land and sea jurisdictions. This is our international jurisdiction. Each state is defined geographical boundaries for. And three, the States of America, a confederation of inchoate states of states. That's uppercase S, lowercase tates. Formed under the Articles of Confederation, March 1st, 1781, for the purpose of conducting the business of the states in global commercial jurisdiction. These federal states of states have no defined geographical boundaries. They only exist on paper, hence the usurpation we keep talking about. These are the missing federal states of states. Basically, the usurpation that we're talking about is what these current actors are doing and not giving recognition or taking heed to our lawful authority and jurisdiction that we reside on.
Yeah.
Not under the Residency Act.
I agree. Well, I just want people to know as we go forward, if you ever hear state of states, it's basically the paper version. It's it's international, but it's what is on paper, like a corporation.
Right.
It's not a living entity. So anyways, all that together, the United States, the United States of America, and the states of America, that is your American government. That's what it was. That's the American government, which existed prior to and which created the federal government, which is an instrumentality to provide services to the states and the people of this country. So we talk about that all the time. Our subcontractors, you hear us say that. That is who we, the people, gave these contracts to do, to provide us with services. And that's it. Nothing else. None of this other horse shit really that's going on, but that's what it was. So it's a national jurisdiction, the soil jurisdiction in each state of this country.
So imagine a familiar outline of your State of the Union. Can you guys comprehend that? Just imagine the outline of your State of the Union. And then now pretend you were slicing it into, layers, pieces horizontally. Taking the top 6 inches of the soil off. It has the same outline and shape, but not much depth. This is your state's national soil jurisdiction, the top 6 inches. And then we call all the rest underneath the soil the land. The land is also shaped exactly like the outline of your State of the Union, but it is a much thicker layer, miles deep, and it forms your state's international land jurisdiction. Together we call this the land and soil of your State of the Union. The two jurisdictions, the national soil jurisdiction, state and the international land jurisdiction, uppercase S state, are both geographically defined and both worked together.
Yeah.
So what are we always saying? We run concurrently alongside all of the actors doing their thing statutorily and internationally next to us. Just to kind of break that down a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. People just have to understand like you said, the first 6 inches of substance that you're walking on, that everything is on, is the soil. The crops grow, in the soil, plants in the soil. Now below the soil, all over every state, is the land,
It's just
so
not
what
defined.
was that?
It's just not defined. There's a lot of confusion about it when people talk about national soil jurisdiction or land and soil. So this is perfect for tonight. It's no
Exactly.
time better than now. Go ahead.
So, what does the national soil jurisdiction of your state do, and how does it operate? The first thing it does is guarantee local control, really. It keeps, as the soil jurisdiction, it's basically your county. Your national jurisdiction is in your county, and it brings that control locally. Your counties run, each county in every state runs on its own. And like right now, we got an incorporated federal government that franchised to incorporated state governments, who franchised to incorporated county governments, who franchised to incorporated town and city governments. And it's just nuts. We've been talking about this forever. So, it guarantees local control. This is the level of the state republics and the Republican states guaranteed by the constitutional contracts. You see it in there. I've told you before. Open up your constitution, look right in there. It says that we are guaranteed a Republican form of government. And a lot of people don't take the time to look at that or try to find out what it means, but that's what we're guaranteed. And that contract is for our service providers. We, the people, are not under the Constitution. We don't have to follow the Constitution. They do. We gave that to them. That's their rules.
Right.
That's what they have to follow. So when you're born and enter into the world via soil jurisdiction of your state, and your political status is known as man of the soil. That is called jus soli, or state national. This determines your basic nationality. We, for example, are Ohioans. Well, at Adams, Ohioan, I'm actually a Californian because it's where you're born. So in that, just for now, we'll go as Ohioans. And that is with all small letters, no capital letters in there. That denotes that you are on the national jurisdiction, all small letter Ohioans. And because you're in a county that has a state, an international jurisdiction, you are also an Ohioan with a capital O. So you got Ohioan with the small o, which is in the county level, the soil jurisdiction, and an Ohioan with the capital O, which is the international jurisdiction of the land.
Right. Yep.
And we're also considered as Ohioans. This in turn identifies you as an American, since you are an Ohioan. For international purposes, you are also an American. Once you declare yourself one, get out of that U.S. citizenship, you'll be part of it.
Yeah.
Right.
So, when we're born, we're not citizens of anything. Being a citizen implies an obligation to serve a government. It's patently ridiculous to claim that a newborn baby has an obligation to serve any government. Nonetheless, Here we are. Certain disreputable governmental services, corporations have made exactly such a claim against babies born in America for several generations now. This is part of what we need to address. It's just like you said, this is the jus soli status of the baby that needs basically to have its political status corrected at the state level. For purposes of reclaiming your state national position, your title. Neither one of these, have an obligation to serve any government at all. They're just required to obey the public law and keep the peace. And other than that, they're pretty much free as a bird. That's where those tacit agreements come into place as far as birth certificates and, the Social Security fraud scam. And, that leads us into all of the other tacit agreements that come thereafter, licensing, all that type of stuff, titling, registering, those types of things. When you
Yeah,
get
I had some lady asking me the other day on I think it was Facebook. She left a comment. She said, what should she do about one of her kids getting a driver's license? How does that all work out?" And you know what? We don't exactly have a what would you call it? A process or procedure for that as of yet. But I was just like, the way she made it sound was, without that license, what can they, how can they drive? How can they travel or whatever? And I was like, you know what? All kids, especially ones that are growing up where their mothers and fathers are state nationals, you can take a driver's class just like everybody else, just like all the rest of the kids. You pass it, you can go into the testing area where they test you. You can take the written test, the maneuvers test, you pass all that stuff, and then you should be good to go. I mean, what's the difference of passing those tests and then going down to the BMV and getting a license?
and
Nothing.
waiving your rights through registration, basically.
Yeah. But
So,
once you pass the test, you should be good.
right, yeah, as long as you don't have a loan that requires you to get insurance and all that type of stuff, and you have those type of agreements that keep you stuck, complying with that system. If you have, an automobile that you own outright and you can figure out how to get your MCO, that pulls you outside of all that registration stuff and, the revised codes pertaining to driving.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation. I can't believe that these C jurisdiction Leos, sheriffs, that they just don't get the difference between driving and traveling. You see it on YouTube videos all the time. They just cannot comprehend the difference
Right.
between doing stuff commercially, or just going out for a joyride.
Well, I mean, they're only required 600 to 800 hours of education through their academies to become, peace officers. And, it's funny because, most 4G to 6G welders require about the same or more. Most trade schools require more training. So you would think, they wouldn't just be able to go to 8 weeks minimum, 16-week academies, or whether they're going through the Troopers Academy, which is, like 6 months, that they would have more of a background in with law, not just all that legal statutory or code stuff. So,
Yeah, it's concerning. When you talk to the FBI or anybody like that, they're just so stuck on what they were taught that there's nothing else. The books that tell you all this information, they're not real to these people. The history of this country isn't real.
that's because from the top down, they're being told that anybody that says anything to the contrary of what they learned is some type of sovereign citizen or some type of extremist, and that's just the furthest thing from the truth. We need to get wise to that, because before you start violating people's rights and unlawfully detaining them, or read false arrest and imprisonment. Read
Yeah.
that, if anything else, and comprehend it. It's only 80 some pages. They have time
Well,
to do that in their free time.
well, you know what? Before they go and lump us into a group of really crazy and neurotic people that are against law enforcement, they need to see what we're all about. I mean, I say it all the time. See that flag right there? That is the peace flag. We're at peace. I don't even think about your jurisdiction. I don't even need to interact with your jurisdiction. I'm not mad at you guys.
Not at all.
We're actually your employers. You are working for one of our subcontractors.
Right.
So we just want you to learn and do your damn job.
Under us and beside us concurrently.
Yeah.
But, that's a whole different thing. We'll probably work our way up to that in small increments, because we don't want anybody's head popping off their shoulders because they just, shock factor. It does
Yeah.
happen. There's a lot of egos, tensions run high. It's not coming from our side. We're just trying to put the information out and, help them out a little bit, because we know they're not going to get it from their superiors or in that system. This is not going to happen.
I'm just trying to help out. Well, anyways, the soil jurisdiction also includes surface water, because if you think about it, first 6 inches of the ground, the soil, that is the soil jurisdiction. What do you see on the soil jurisdiction? You see lakes, you see rivers, so soil jurisdiction includes the water surface. So each state of the republic, also the republic of each state, is attached to it for business purposes. So you have, now here's where it gets not confusing, but you'll have the Ohio Republic, and that's operating in the soil jurisdiction. So that is the county, the Ohio Republic. And you also have the Republic of Ohio, which is operating the surface water jurisdiction of Ohio. These entities are unincorporated and operate as unincorporated businesses.
Right.
The local people retain the vast majority of power of the government, and if they act in their proper capacity and organized to do so, everyone is standing on the soil. So the power of arrest basically belongs to the soil jurisdiction and the Republican state authorities and their county sheriffs, us. We have the arrest power. It shouldn't be these LEOs. I mean, in their jurisdiction, we got to help them out. We got to help them realize that what they're doing is not right. Common law is not statutory. It's not revenue generating,
Right. Well, there's no statutory authority behind making traffic infractions a criminal offense.
Yeah.
I don't care what state legislators wrote. We know that they've been bought, and we know that they write whatever the highest bidder, wants them to write. And we're trying to correct that. And if they would go read, false arrest and imprisonment, it talks about warrants too, warrantless searches and all that type of stuff. So that right there is going to be the bread and butter that helps course correct. And, we can help give guidance too, but they got to get out of their egos, and, they got to be willing to have an open mind and come to the table and have these discussions with us.
You're right. That's the big thing, I think, the ego. Because you know what, a lot of the stops that I see on videos and stuff, they start out with a simple, maybe a light being out, and by the end of it, some guy's handcuffed or his window's broken. You know what I mean? It's just crazy.
Right.
It's really crazy.
Yeah. I think that they should all be taking drug tests if they're taking any antibiotics or anything that's going to cause them to be raging on testosterone, or they're taking supplements, like Tesanol, or, I can tell the type. I've been around extreme sports and things of that nature my whole life. So I know, most of the people that I've been around, they go the natural route, and they get a rush out of doing things because it's extreme. But you get these other guys who take the supplements and take these other things, and they can't operate or function properly while they're out there in the public, supposed to be doing a job. Because if you say something that, hurts their ego, and they're under the influence of whatever supplement, it's going to escalate really quick. It's going to go hands-on because they're raging.
Yeah, the aggression's at its all-time high. Well, however, operating the land and soil jurisdiction of your state of the union requires us to forswear and expatriate from other citizenships. If you want to be an American, you have to expatriate from the U.S. citizenship, including the federal citizenship. Most Americans don't realize that they've been kidnapped on paper into a foreign jurisdiction, and we talk about this all the time, and misidentified as either a United States citizen, a citizen of the United States, or a U.S. citizen. Almost from birth, a circumstance that keeps us from actually owning our land and controlling our own assets. These are the contracts we're talking about.
Absolutely. So, coming home to the land and soil of your state means that you are eligible to inherit all that you have been deprived of, basically everything that's been stripped of you and converted into a privilege. Um, that you've come under the public law now, once you come over here. Instead of any private statutory law, you can exercise local control of your land and surface water resources, because what do they always claim that these corporations own and control? The land and the mineral rights. How
Yeah.
can something that only exists on paper, you see how asinine that sounds? How can something that only exists on paper and has puppets who are enacting in vacated positions control anything? So, anyhow, um, where was I going to go with that? Local control over your land and surface water resources, and that you can operate your Republican states. That is the national soil jurisdiction, not the federal soil jurisdiction. What is that, anyways? Maybe we should get into that in another topic. Um, yeah, the national soil jurisdiction of your state and your state of the union. So again, as we saw, the national soil jurisdiction is controlled by unincorporated Republican states, which are members of the United States. The international jurisdiction is controlled by unincorporated states, which are members of the United States of America, a federation of states. The international jurisdiction is controlled by your state and has three components: air, land, and sea. Kind of like how people refer to law being an acronym: land, air, and water. I think Jordan Maxwell described that best, but we're not coming from that perspective.
Yeah. Well, we talk about that all the time on here, the land and soil, the air and the water law. Well,
Right.
also because the international businesses are operating in international jurisdiction, but they're interfacing directly with the state soil jurisdiction. So you got these international businesses, and they, because they're a business, they're in our counties and they're operating, but they're foreign, and their jurisdictions directly with our state soil jurisdiction. There are conflicts of the law that result. The most visible part of the conflict of law arises for the fact that these private international business organizations functioning under the international law have been allowed to employ Pinkertons. I'm thinking a lot of you maybe heard of Pinkertons. It's actually the guy's name. I think it came from England, but they were private. They used to work on the railroads, the Pinkertons. But that's basically what they brought here: private law enforcement agencies within the boundaries of each state. And these LEO organizations have proliferated and been hired as subcontractors in other venues to substitute for actual peacekeeping offices and officials. So basically, they're corporations that hired security guards. They work in our counties and in our cities, and they call them police. Bottom
Right.
line.
But here's the bridge, is that corporations can only interface with other corporations. So if I'm not the thing on the piece of paper, why are you bothering me at all? And that's part of the education that comes from all of this, is that you don't have the right or the authority. You can't presume and assume that you can just go make contact with somebody. You probably should get out of the practice of doing that, because for me, that translates to harassment. People can walk down the street. You don't get to just walk up to everybody because you're in a bad mood and just start picking, you know, little fights with people and stuff like that, and then turn it into a detention. And just get out of the habit of that stuff.
Yeah.
That would
Yeah.
probably help. So I think we're talking about, um, we already covered that, they're not even properly appointed, and, they're not elected. We know that. We're lawfully elected. We're qualified electors. We're not in that system for them to scrutinize. However, I have heard that some of them think that they have the authority to make determinations for us, as far as how we identify, and that's becoming to be a little bit of a problem. So we're gonna probably put some material together on that for another topic, and we'll probably do a live over it. So law enforcement officers, LEOs, generally speaking, one, they're not familiar with the public law, our law of the land, whichever jurisdiction, national or soil. They've never been trained to enforce the code and statutory law of the international jurisdiction. Instead, two, are not properly directed to enforce the public law, even when they are hired to do so. So these private security agencies have become abusive and have failed to recognize the fact that the people, uppercase P people, of the state are living under the public law. And except when they are actually on a train, in a post office or otherwise in a direct contact with these limited international land jurisdiction functions, railroads, electrical power line, right of ways, these various types of post office, et cetera, et cetera. And there are a couple different versions of them,
Yeah.
So, the living people of each state are not subject to international law within the boundaries of their state because we're one of the several other states. We're not within that 10 square miles of the District of Columbia. This is something that, we also keep coming back to because we know that these state legislators have created a bridge for these lower inferior courts to act as if they can act judicially when they're non-judicial persons, and we're not in that territory of DC or District of America, whatever it's called nowadays. Yeah. Either way, it's shut down. I don't care. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, the territorial state-to-state employees and the municipal state-to-state employees are subject to international law, but the states and people are not. We, the people, are not. Until and unless we direct or interface with a railroad, a post office, or other interstate, international utility. For example, if we rob a post office or vandalize a power pole or murder someone in a railway right of way, they have nothing to do with us. That's what we're trying to get to here. They do have some authority, and it's in those certain federal places. Other than that, they'd have no authority to stop, talk, arrest, anything to an American.
Right. Right. That's what's
for the
important.
love of God. There are employees.
Right. And that's the funny thing about this. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but I talk about this all the time. Back when I was in, grade school, wearing short pants, times were a little bit different then. But the crimes were still happening. The usurpation was still there. We were still made collateral for, our deficit. And, I never agreed to that. That wasn't even in my lifetime. That was before I was born. So, how can you say that I'm held or bound to some agreement that I never got full disclosure on? And obviously they don't teach this stuff in school. So, I mean, you just got to start asking questions and do your research, self-govern. And yes, you got to have dark humor, Samantha. You got to have somewhat of a bit of humor talking about this stuff because some of it's so common sense that we shouldn't even be having to, have these arguments. But here we are,
Yeah.
So, the territorial and municipal organizations in each state have discovered that they can make money by arresting people and filling up prisons, usually their private facilities. Some are not, which has led to the proliferation of more and more oppressive statutory laws being created every year. And, it just goes from there into, pushing the agenda of filling all of these beds and racks that they have in these prisons. They want to keep them full. Have you ever noticed that prosecutors have like a 96 to 98% win rate? And I guarantee you 100% of the time they're violating due process. And that, you can look that up. So, anyways, the prison's for profit scheme is a direct affront to our sovereignty, in which people of each state are deliberately mischaracterized as territorial or municipal persons, held to be subject to territorial and/or municipal international law, and incarcerated at our expense. So, well, at the other guys, the taxpayer U.S. citizens' expense. Um, this is not only an abuse of our people, it's an abuse of our purses by our employees. They're profiting themselves by arresting us under color of law, charging us under statutory laws we are not naturally obligated to obey, and we have no obligation to perform in their legal processes. And then charging our states, for the service of putting us in jail. So
Yeah.
I gotta, you know, sometimes I catch myself wanting to laugh, when I'm reading through that, because again, common sense.
Well,
If you read through historical law and procedure, you'll see the breakdown of all of the shenanigans and the usurpations, and it's just crazy.
yeah, you know how we was just talking about they don't have jurisdiction really other than in post offices, federal places like that, and the right of way of railroads. Maybe that's where the term getting railroaded came from.
Well, they started off as private security for the railroad companies as they were building. There was a race going on with the Union Pacific and the Transcontinental Railroad out in the west that went up to Oregon and then worked its way back down to Ogden, Utah, and they needed security. So back at that time, it was perfect for the guys that fought in the the North and South War. And a lot of these soldiers were finding themselves in situations where they were either laboring, helping build the railways, or they were operating as Union Pacific police for the railroads, private security. And then if you go before that, there were police over plantations, over slaves. And it just kind of worked its way from there through all the different various types of Pinkertons up to what we have now. And history has been buried and hidden from us.
And here we are.
Right, talking about it on YouTube.
Yeah, here we are.
Well,
let's talk about the public and organic law. As stupefying as it is, the public law of this country has not been enforced in any organized and comprehensive fashion for at least the last 50 years. A semblance of that or themselves put in an appearance of justice. We've talked about that before. It's kind of like the color of law. They just give you the appearance of justice to make everybody feel good when really you're getting railroaded in the behind. And it's provided for private corporate courts operating in private self-governing jural societies. These jural societies are opposed to our jural assemblies. That's what we have in our jurisdiction. In the land and soil jurisdictions, we operate by assemblies. We operate in the international jurisdiction of the sea and administer its statutory law. And they have no authority to address the living people at all, much less one of the people who are their employees or their employer. We talked about that too. It gets kind of tiring repeating all this same stuff, but we just got to keep getting it into everyone's heads, to do the research, get out there and learn some of this stuff. I know a lot of it's confusing, but the more and more you go over it, the easier it makes.
Yeah, it definitely takes some comprehension of terminology. There's various terminology that's used in different jurisdictions. Some of it's similar in nature, but it could mean something totally different. This is why we got to get away from what they're doing with legalese and all their sorcery and magician work and spell work. But we're not talking about mud floods. We're not talking about Tartarian empires and dynasties. And I get all that stuff. I'm fascinated with it, but that's not what we're talking about here. It is very interesting stuff. One of the guys made a comment that we dug up a lot of railroads and stuff like that were covered in mud. That is true. That has been recorded. I've seen numerous things, pointing to that, but I get it. We've been breadcrumbed bits and pieces of truth, and I can attest to that. I found a lot of things that just were not in alignment with what we were breadcrumbed. So
Adam, how have they gotten away with it, with usurping upon us and our government and commandeering millions of Americans into their foreign sea jurisdiction courts?
Well, I mean, they've gotten away with addressing people as persons. There's several different types of persons. So figuring out which one you are and how you want to operate, that's a start. I highly emphasize on, being a lawful person if you're going to be one of those things. And, if you're going to do business, then, you can be one of the other type of persons. But just know that there is going to be paperwork and assumptions and presumptions that bind you to, their system. So, via a process of falsification of records called registrations, these registration documents then provide the excuse for them to presume that we are volunteering to act as a corporate franchisee subject to whatever private international corporate laws they concoct and impose upon their franchises. So just remember, this isn't just about you. It's about your children, your community, your country. Their system only works if you stay asleep. So wake up, get your heads out of your butts, and stop making excuses. Do your research. Get together with people in your community. Start with your families. I get it. I've gone through that with some of my family, but 90% of them are on board and they're learning the history. And, I am very proud of that, they are not indoctrinated and that they have ears that listen to comprehend, not just to respond like we get on so many assemblies. People are just there to bicker and fight because they're scared. Then we need to get out of these mindsets.
Yeah.
So offspring.
We do. Yeah. Sorry, we do have to go over, we got to make sure that everybody, because we get so many questions and a lot of them are the same. They want to know how to become a state national, how to change your political status, so we tell you all the time on the screen, well, it's not on the screen, but there's a TASA website, tasa.americanstatenationals.org. And you can go there and check it out. It tells you everything to do. And, there's also, Anna has a website. It's www.annavonrights.com. And she has over 5,000 articles that would just blow your socks off, because it basically scrolls through the whole process of the history and the fraud that's been perpetrated upon us, and you can read all these articles at your leisure, at your own time, your own pace. You probably wouldn't be able to read them all. There's 5,000. What was that?
Somebody said something that I related with because, I have a few people that, they have professional licenses and they own businesses and properties. And it's like that, I get it. I get why they're worried because they've worked so hard their adult lives, and they don't want to get in trouble. I get that. But at the same time, at least they're willing to hear what we're talking about. They just don't want to do the paperwork side of things. At some point, they probably will come over, because the way the world is these days, I mean, they are starting to see things for what they really are. But it's like we keep saying, back the blue until it happens to you. Well, that applies to those, de facto systems too that are incorporated. You're not part of that incorporation. So, but anyways, I digress.
Yeah, I know. I just want, if there's anybody out there watching that knows law enforcement officers or FBI agents or anything like that, go ahead and talk to them. Tell them what's going on, because this is the real deal. This ain't a game. It's not a joke. We've been usurped. We've been lied to. We've been cheated of our birthright.
National
And
soil jurisdiction, Lee.
yeah, I mean, ever since you can look at the Civil War, look at the Reconstruction Acts, look what happened. The American government was never reconstructed until a few years ago, and we're back. We're just filling in the spots that were always supposed to be there, occupied.
Yeah, I agree. An unrebutted affidavit is supposed to stand as a truth in commerce, but I've got about probably 20 of them that just fall on deaf ears. So even though I've sent fee schedules and numerous things of that nature, criminals are going to do what criminals do. You know,
Yeah.
got to go and arrest them. You guys got to start reconstructing, filling the vacated positions, and, taking your land and soil back. That's what you got to do. Not saying it to be a dick or anything like that, but we got a lot of older people who don't comprehend that they need to go put their city employees and their county employees on notice. There's nothing wrong with going and putting them on notice at their meetings, as long as you're not saying fighting words to them. You can call them an asshole, you can call them a dick, you can tell them to pipe it down. Those aren't fighting words directed at them. They're just adjectives, sentence enhancers. And, if they got a problem with that, they can go research Cohen v. California. Tell them I sent them there.
Yeah.
Awesome case. I got the recording. I listen to it probably once or twice a week. I love it. It's good stuff.
Well, you know what? There's something is happening behind the scenes right now. I mean, you can't think that everything's kosher when, we get governmental service contract providers down and out for 30 days. That's, I mean, something's going on. The stock market the banks, everything's starting to implode. And I think more people are going to see what's going on with us here sooner or later.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's coming. It's coming to a point where I don't want to say necessarily that all of them are of the mind that what we're saying is not true, but the plausible deniability thing, it's unacceptable. We know what they're doing. We've been watching it and gathering evidence for a while now. We're seeing what's going on across the country and throughout the world. This isn't just here in the States, it's going on in Australia, Europe. This is not just here in the States. This whole state national thing, this is not just here in the States. It's across the world. So, that's the thing that the FBI and the Leos don't talk about on their website. They don't realize that this is slowly coming to a conclusion where people finally wake up, and all of the things that they're doing, places they're employed by, they're going to have a choice. Either you come over here where you're supposed to be lawfully acting and take some other type of status and position on the right side of the law, or you're going to be subjected to the public law. And we have all of that stuff documented to back us up.
Yeah.
And it's not a threat. It's
You're right.
Going to come.
We've been saying this for a while. Accountability is coming. It is coming. This country, this continent, this planet, this land, it cannot operate like this anymore. It's just crazy. I mean, especially our service, our service providers, not to, they're foreign, not to mention a corporation, and just running amok all over the world. Things are happening in different countries.
Right.
It's insanity.
Yeah, I mean, something that should be waking people up that are scared. And I mean, I get this from my friends, their parents. Oh, don't get involved with that. You're going to get in trouble. They're not going to get in trouble. Only the types of people that don't comprehend and they don't research and they just do frivolous paperwork. Those are the types of people that make a bad name for themselves and, get in trouble because, they're not following through with processes and research. We're not part of those people or those groups. We can't all just be put as truthers into one category and then be told that we're being misidentified as something extreme. I'm not doing anything extreme at all. I know my law and I know my history, and I know how things are supposed to be done statutorily. And when they're not doing things that they're supposed to be doing, from my research, and I do a lot of it, um, yes, I'm going to speak out about it. That's my duty. That's all of our duty. So
Yeah,
if people are sitting there thinking you're going to get in trouble, they're not doing their duty. Okay, they're
exactly.
just they're simply just failing, and that's fine. I would rather be around a small group of people of doers instead of being around a group of people who are just inactive and they don't act and do anything to get anything done to change anything for the better. You know, yeah, I know you feel that. It's not just me. I mean, that's why we get together and we have these discussions, is because we see so much inactivity and inaction across the states.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it's all about. It's easy to sit around and talk about this stuff. And, it's easy to sit by yourself and read and learn. But what's missing is the action, putting all your learnings into action, going out, facing people, facing cops, facing FBI agents, facing mayors, facing city councils, putting them on notice, letting them know you're here. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with you telling them you're a state national. And once they find out you're there, they'll probably do a little digging into you, just to see, hey, what's this guy doing? What's this gal doing?
Well, they're doing their job at that point. They're checking you
Exactly.
out to see if you're a threat. We're not a threat. If we were a threat, we wouldn't have been on here after the third episode. They would have came knocking on the door, just like the feds that we talked to have said already, right? Hey, if we thought you were a threat, we would have come. We would have come
Exactly.
and talked to you. So
And you know what? That we would have went viral with somebody coming in knocking us off our chair.
don't come here. I'll make you famous.
Yeah. But yeah, we're not taking over anything. We're just restoring historically what has always been there, missing. Well, we're just restoring it. We're restoring our offices, all our assemblies. And I think it's like we talked about, more and more people are getting interested, more and more people are getting involved, and it's great. And I enjoy this time. I enjoy telling people about it because it helps us all.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to them for occupying still vacated offices. And they earlier on did somewhat of an okay, a bang up job. But now I don't think that they're really doing what they're supposed to do, and they're not discharging their duty the way they're supposed to. So we're kind of like going to have to take our offices back. And that's all part of the reconstruction. And it's okay as long as we're doing the peacekeeping thing and following the proper channels and the proper processes through paperwork and noticing. Um, I don't see what the argument is other than just, hey, these guys are taking away my Ponzi scheme, and I don't get to sit and live high off the hog anymore. Well, you shouldn't have ever been living high off the hog from, that job.
Yeah.
There should be term limits. There shouldn't be people trading constantly, doing breach of duty and breach of contract of their own oaths of office, if they even have one, if they even have a proper appointment.
Well, Adam, because we were missing in action, the American government, we got our subcontractors running amok, making their own rules, making their own term limits, making it's crazy. It is
Yeah.
literally crazy.
Yeah, I don't want to go off and do a tangent too far on them, but just the bottom line is that I sit back every day researching, doing my job as far as investigating certain things that are going on locally because we're supposed to keep an eye on it. But at the same time, we got these guys checking us out too, and it's like we're not doing anything wrong. It's just that they think that this franchise agency that they work for some reason has more authority, and then they're trying to tell us that we have to do statutory things to be qualified to have access to their systems. That's just not true. I mean, that might be what they're trained to say or think, but you work for us. We work concurrently alongside you. No, you guys are not in charge of us. You have no authority over us. It's the other way around. My employee's not going to tell me that they can just
Yeah.
do whatever they want. That's the problem with what's going on in the country now. Look at what the de facto foreign subcontractor agents are doing in D.C.
Yeah.
Look what all these governors are doing.
Well, it's coming down. It's coming down. I know I guess Donald Trump isn't, I don't know. I'm not a fan or with him or against him, anything. He's just whatever. He's one of our subcontractor CEOs, basically. That's it. And, what he's doing is kind of cleaning up their jurisdiction, their foreign corporation. He's cleaning it up, which I guess is a good thing for us. It's helping out with the corruption. But he has to comprehend that there is no real president right now, because we haven't elected a real president.
Right. And they're not part of the American government. They are part of the corporation. Corporations have presidents, by the way, not lawful governments. So, I mean, yeah, there could be somebody who comes over and, acts as, a head of state to that effect. But we're not a corporation. The American government is not a corporation. So that's where there's a lot of misconception. And
well, it's a corporate, but it's business, but it's not incorporated. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's unincorporated.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on as far as like OSA office, and like a lot of people keep talking about bonds. And look, the bottom line is that the majority of these jokers don't have the proper appointments. They don't have the proper stuff filed with the Secretary of State. Recognizance bonds, there's a clause where they're supposed to be under proper appointment, proper oath before they step into office, and the majority of them don't do that. I can tell you, I've done lots of research, and a lot of them are just sitting there in these positions unlawfully as hell. Oh, I got elected. There was a public election, and they showed us on TV, and it doesn't matter if you didn't get the proper appointment and oath at the same time before you took office, which those are still vacated positions.
Those oaths drive me a little bonkers, because the American government has separation between church and state. There's separation there. It's not convoluted, but you got these our subcontractors swearing oaths, hand on a Bible, all that jazz, and it ain't supposed to be like that.
Hey, Lee, I haven't seen you on TikTok recently. Are you still doing lives over there? I know I follow you. If so, if you want to collaborate and jump on a live or something and hold like a topic discussion, let me know. Other than that, what else do you got?
Yeah, I was going to wrap it up because I think we did our best. I hope everybody kind of got a little bit out of that, Maybe we'll try to do another jurisdiction another time. But anyways, I'm going to go over my line that you said it earlier. Remember, everybody, this isn't just about you. It's about your children. It's about your community. It's about your country. And it only, their system only works if you stay asleep. So wake up, stand up, and speak up. Appreciate everybody for stopping by.
Right.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for showing up, showing out.
Right.
Restore the Republic, baby.
Yeah.
Remember, sorry, Adam, pknews.org, claimyourinheritance.info. Go to these sites, check them out. And remember, we have a Cash App, $APC140 if you want to donate. If not, we'll keep on keeping on. Go ahead,
I was going to say, if anybody wants to come over and be a guest on either Rumble or YouTube, let me know. Leave a comment. I'll come back and I'll reach out to you. We just want fresh meat, to be able to come in and give their insight. We're curious what a lot of you guys are doing, or, what types of things you're involved in, and, let's grow together.
All right, guys. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you soon. Appreciate everybody showing up.
Have a good Saturday night.
All right, take it easy, Adam. Everybody get involved. Join your state assembly. Join your county assemblies. Let's get this stuff moving. See y'all later.